everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. Bunch of things to jump into here before we get to the video you came here for. One, do me a favor, hit that little black subscribe button at the bottom of the screen. Really does help this channel grow, this audience grow. Two, beyond that, want to thank our presenting sponsor, Betfred Sportsbook, and the Betfred Sportsbook app. You can bet $50 on any game, baseball season, get up to $1,111 in free bets, courtesy of the Betfred Sportsbook. And three, as a quick reminder, we are doing NBA draft previews. Myself and my good friend Zach Kroll works for me at Aaron Torres Media. Last week we did Victor Wembanyama. Today we are talking about Arkansas guard Anthony Black. As you'll hear momentarily, I really like Anthony Black. Think he is going to be a phenomenal NBA player. By the way, this whole series of interviews, not only available on YouTube, but also make sure to check out the College Hoops Daily podcast feed where Zach talks college hoops basically 365 days a year. Check out the podcast. Check out this NBA draft preview of Anthony Black. And I'll be back tomorrow with a new episode of the Aaron Torres Pod.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the College Hoops Daily podcast presented by Betfred Sports. My name is Zach Kroll. I'm your host, and we are here today to do another edition of our NBA draft prospect preview series here on the College Hoops Daily podcast. In case you guys missed it, my guy Aaron Torres, he's joined me over the course of the last few days. We broke down Victor Wembanyama, the fact that he's likely going to go to the San Antonio Spurs, #1 in the draft, what they should expect from him. We also recently broke down the debate of what the Charlotte Hornets should do with the #2 overall pick between Brandon Miller and Scoot Henderson. Those are really the two prospects most people think they are considering. But we're going to continue the series today. And instead of focusing on an individual team and the decision they're going to make, we're going to shift a little bit towards some of the other prospects in this draft, guys that are expected to go in the top 10 in the lottery. And we'll give you guys some details and some full breakdowns on their game and what you could expect to watch them. Today, we will be breaking down Anthony Black of Arkansas. But of course, I'm not going to be doing it on my own. I'd like to welcome in our guy, the host of the Aaron Torres podcast, the founder of Aaron Torres Media. AT, what's going on, man? How are you?
ZK, not much, man. You know, we've been talking off air, and Anthony Black's a really fun one. I'm really excited to talk about him. You know, his game grew on me over the course of the college basketball season. And I don't think people fully appreciate everything that he was asked to do for Arkansas at an Arkansas program that, you know, just all season long, there was just players coming in and out of the lineup because of injuries. Trevon Brazile, Nick Smith, obviously it goes without saying, who we may profile sometime between now and the draft. But I just bring it up because the more that I thought about who this kid is, Anthony Black, and what he was asked, the more impressed I was as we got ready to do this show.
I think right off the bat, that's a really good point. And we brought this up a lot yesterday about Brandon Miller when we were talking about him. The fact that going into the season, he wasn't necessarily expected to be a top 5, top 10 pick in the draft. And he played his way up to being likely the #2 or the #3 pick. And I think Anthony Black, he is kind of similar, but what's even more impressive about him, like you mentioned, right off the bat, Arkansas and Eric Musselman, they expected a lot out of him. And I know he's a consensus top 10, top 15 prospect coming out of high school, but I think he really did a good job living up to those expectations while his role was pretty difficult considering as a freshman, it's not easy, especially in the SEC, to come in right away and make a significant impact. And one thing about Black that really stood out to me this past season right off the bat, I remember watching him in Maui, that big tournament when you had Arkansas, you had Creighton, you had Arizona, a lot of really good teams there. And Nick Smith, before the season even started, there were concerns about his injuries and how much time he was going to miss. And it's crazy because even though the Arkansas freshman class last year, there was a ton of hype, there was a ton of excitement going in, but Nick Smith was really the guy that everyone was talking about as the can't-miss prospect. And unfortunately, before the season even starts, he's out due to injury, and Coach Muss immediately puts the ball in Anthony Black's hands. Like, I'm going to be honest with you, AT, like, going into last season, I didn't even realize that Anthony Black was like a point guard. I thought he was a wing, and I think he was super impressive. Anytime he had the ball in his hands, like he would make such nice plays, and I think it says a lot about the fact that right off the bat, Eric Musselman, a guy that has won a lot of games coaching college basketball, a guy that has had a lot of success in the NCAA tournament, he trusted him with the ball in his hands right off the bat in the SEC, that's not something you always see with a freshman coming into college basketball.
Well, yeah, and it speaks to exactly what I just said right away is that, you go into a season thinking you're 8, 9 deep, maybe even more, and that you have this lottery pick in Nick Smith, that is going to be your primary playmaker with the ball in his hands, and you're not quite sure how are all the pieces going to fit. One, this is what I would say to any team, program, NBA, pro, high school, whatever. Like, this is why recruiting matters, drafting matters, development matters, whatever, because, I remember doing interviews in Arkansas last summer, about a year ago now, and everyone's saying, how are all the pieces going to fit? What are you going to do with this guy? What about that guy? And unfortunately, they dealt with some injuries. And so, like you, I remember watching the Maui Invitational. And one thing I'd even add about Anthony Black, which I think is worth noting as well, he actually played Team USA basketball last summer, one of the under 18, under 19 events, and actually came to campus really late. And that was kind of the buzz, like just in kind of college basketball circles, was like, hey, Nick Smith is good, but this Anthony Black guy is even better than we anticipated. So he shows up late. And then, as you said, kind of gets thrown into the fire, maybe even in a role that he wasn't anticipating fully because of Nick Smith's presence there when he committed. And I'm with you, is I remember tuning into that Maui Invitational. Now, I knew he could handle the ball and be a playmaker, but like you said, against a veteran team like a Creighton, I remember watching that game and saying, like, if this is the second best prospect or the second best freshman on this Arkansas team, this team's going to be in really good shape. And so he played great against them, played well the next night, a team you didn't even mention. Oh, by the way, the national runners-up, San Diego State, Arkansas beats them. And you go on and on down the list. And I think that exactly what you said is that whether it was the intention or whether it was because of injuries, a lot was put on that kid's plate. And the one thing, and we could get into everything that he does well and what he needs to work on and stuff, but I think the thing that stands out to me is the poise that he plays with, of going into a Rupp Arena, going into an Auburn Arena, going into a neutral court against Creighton in the Maui Invitational, unflappable. And it's one of the many reasons why I've really grown to like him as a prospect, as I've gotten to learn more about him over the last year.
Absolutely. So he is very lengthy and he is a very gifted passer. I would say right off the bat, those would probably be his top two strengths. And it's interesting too. We spoke a little bit about this also when debating Miller and Scoot. Like, length is, of course, a big thing that a lot of executives and GMs in the league look for, but a lot of times it's on the wing. It's very rare to have a point guard like that. But at the same time, that's always a bonus and a positive that a lot of teams would like.
Can I jump in on that really quick? Because I think that's something I don't even know that I realized how important it was to have that kind of size until this. Like, you watched that UConn team that won the national championship, right? And it's interesting. Obviously, that was the team that ended Arkansas's season. Sorry, Arkansas fans that are listening. But talking to teams that played against that team, it was like, there's just no break anywhere. Their guards are 6'5" and 6'5", and they're they have a kid named Andre Jackson, who's this playmaker at 6'7", 6'8". And so you look at that, you look at the NBA playoffs, even, where I know they've been eliminated, but the Lakers' size just completely overwhelmed Golden State in the second round of the playoffs. The Miami Heat, unless I'm missing somebody, it's kind of Jimmy Butler, Caleb Martin, size across the board. Denver, size across the board. Jamal Murray, 6'4", 6'5", but you have Aaron Gordon that can make plays. Michael Porter, 6'10", 6'11", on top of Jokic and stuff like that. So I didn't mean to cut you off, but I don't know, like, I don't want to sit here and say, like, that's where the sport is going. Like, if you start anybody under 6'5", you can't win. But I just want to cut you off because I don't think I realized how overwhelming size and length can be at the college game or even in the professional ranks until these last couple months, seeing the success of UConn in the tournament and then the teams that have obviously made it deep into the playoffs in the NBA.
I think that's a really good point right off the bat, because I that is something I did realize as well, especially with Jamal Murray. Like, I feel like a lot of people don't realize, like, just having a point guard that big right off the bat, his ability to interfere and get in the face of shooters, like, that is a very valuable aspect to have. So one question right off the bat I have with Anthony Black, and I'm curious, like, how he's going to be used to whatever team he gets drafted to, because it is very impressive, as we mentioned, that Eric Musselman, he asked a lot out of him right off the bat. He put the ball in his hands, and that says a lot. Like, for a coach like Muss that has done so much to trust a player like that with the ball in his hands that's new to college basketball right away. But I'm curious, when he gets to the NBA, what is that NBA team going to ask of him? Are they going to ask him to be a point guard? Are they going to ask him to use his length on the wing? Because again, going into last season, I just didn't necessarily realize like how good of a natural passer and how good this kid's court vision is. And I think honestly, that's a big reason why he's going to be drafted this high. I don't think a lot of executives in the league really realize that either. So what do you think is his ideal role in the NBA? And do you think he's going to be ready to play right away as soon as he gets to the league?
Well, and we talked about it a little bit on the previous episode with Scoot and Brandon Miller, especially with Scoot Henderson potentially going to Charlotte. Is that the best spot for him with a guy that already kind of needs the ball in his hands with LaMelo Ball? And so what I would say is, to me, I think it just speaks to, I hate to say it, but so much of success and failure in the NBA, in the NFL, I'm sure in other professional sports as well, is the fit and the opportunity, right? Is that how many great players just went to the wrong place? How many great players needed a second or third opportunity to kind of maximize who they are? Again, go back to these NBA playoffs. Jimmy Butler, how many teams did he bounce around before he found the right fit for him? And yeah, I use the example all the time. It can go both ways, by the way. You can have the teams that draft you wrong and use you wrong. But then I say it all the time is like, if Draymond Green is drafted by a different team, if he's drafted by the Sacramento Kings 10 years ago when they were a mess, he's probably selling insurance somewhere or, doing whatever. Like, he's probably not a future Hall of Famer. So that, I think, is an interesting dynamic as well. Is we saw how good Anthony Black is with the ball in his hands. And I'm not here to say he's definitively ready to have it day one, minute one, game one of his NBA career. But based on what we've seen at Arkansas, based on what we saw throughout his high school career, my thought is that that's probably the role that he is best in. Now, again, in this new world of the NBA where you have multiple playmakers, multiple ball handlers, I would think, kind of like what we said with Scoot Henderson on the previous episode, can you find a role for him as the second guy off the ball? Yeah. I do think, though, that probably with the ball in his hands is the best role for him. And I think it's reflected by the fact of just, again, what he did in the SEC this year as a true freshman. Did turn the ball over a fair amount, but 4 assists, 5 rebounds, 13 points per game. And to your point, Zach, and we've talked about it a lot and everything, is that Eric Musselman, like the way that he runs his operation is, especially at the end of games, he puts the ball in his best player's hands and says, go make winning plays. And not even just at the end of games, during games and throughout games as well. And usually that role is filled historically by older players. JD Note, who's in the G League right now, Mason Jones, Caleb Martin, who's obviously had a great NBA playoffs. And so for him to trust a freshman in that role is pretty impressive. But to answer your question directly, like I do kind of think he's probably at his best, Anthony Black, with the ball in his hands. But again, does he end up in a situation where that's allowed, and how long does it take to get there? All that good stuff.
Absolutely. So another key thing I really have realized about Anthony Black and watching him throughout the season and even more is Arkansas, their one weakness, and I feel like this was the whole SEC's weakness. Like, they could not shoot the ball from 3 last year. And I understand a lot of that might have to do with the fact that Nick Smith was injured. Trevin Brazil, who really, I thought, improved his jump shot throughout the offseason, he was injured early on in the season. And when you look at Anthony Black numbers, he averaged 3.9 assists per game, which is really good as a freshman, but I feel like that number could have been even higher with a little bit more quality shooting around him. And I think that's one big key. You mentioned the situation. Like, you got to put him, if he's your guy with the ball in his hands all the time, I think we both agree, as you said, like that's probably his most ideal role in the NBA. I'm looking forward to seeing him with guys around him on the perimeter that can make shots. And I think, again, that goes to the point of just the fit is key and everything.
Yeah, and I don't know, like, where he could go at. Obviously, look, I mean, I actually think number 4, where the Houston Rockets are picking, kind of makes a lot of sense. They have Jalen Green, they have Jabari Smith. Both those guys are guys that can get buckets, but they don't really have the guy to get them the ball. So now you hear differing things about what they want to do with that pick. One, I think they could trade it for a veteran. 2, there's the possibility that they take one of the Thompson twins or go in another direction. And oh, by the way, 3, there's the possibility that they bring back James Harden, which I don't know if that's wishful thinking on James Harden's part or leverage or whatever, which would obviously change Anthony Black's role if he were to end up going to Houston. So I actually think Houston, as it's constructed, is kind of the perfect spot. And then you go down the list from there. Obviously, Detroit has Cade Cunningham, so that one probably doesn't make a ton of sense. Orlando feels like a spot that could make sense just based on what they have. Washington, much the same. So I'm curious to see it as well. I think you took it another direction. I kind of got off subject there. What was there? What was the actual question or statement that you said in the lead up to that? Because I got sidetracked thinking about James Harden going back to Houston and making 50 something million a year to lose 60 games a year. What was the point that you got to that I got us right off track?
No, I was just saying, like, I think he needs shooting around him. Like,
I agree. Oh, agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
And, no.
Go ahead.
No, and I there's nothing really to add. I totally agree. And that's why I do think Houston's kind of that spot, because you have playmakers, you have guys he can get the ball to. Obviously, we're doing these because we don't know where these guys are going to go. But I'm with you, is that it's a great point by you, is like, he was great at getting the ball to guys in the paint. The Mitchell twins, obviously Trevin Brazil before they got hurt at Arkansas, before he got hurt at Arkansas. But yeah, if he had spot up shooting, a little bit more shooting around him, his numbers could be even better. By the way, I think this will be a recurring theme when we talk about Case and Wallace from Kentucky down the road and a few other guys. But it's a great point by you, is in a perfect world, Arkansas shoots the ball a little bit better. His assist numbers are probably even better than what they showed in the SEC this year.
So that's a really good point about a couple of these prospects that are being drafted at the top, like an Anthony Black, like a Case and Wallace. Like, they have some similar issues that an NBA team that's about to draft them could look at as a possible concern. But another thing about Black is he was only a 30% three-point shooter last year. And that's another reason why I think, again, we're on the same page. Like, his best, most ideal situation is with the ball in his hands. But I'm curious to see if he's going to be able to improve that jump shot. We spoke a little bit about that with Scoot Henderson as well. It's great to be very dynamic and have great court vision with the ball in your hands. But in today's NBA, it's just very difficult to keep you on the floor if you can't make threes. And luckily, I do think that is one of the skills where if you just work harder and harder and you're just in the gym hours throughout the day, like, that is something you could improve. And Black, he does have a pretty nice natural motion. Like, I think that is something he could improve. But if you were an NBA GM about to draft him, would you be concerned at all about that and his ability to shoot the three ball?
Two thoughts on that. One, if I kind of criticize Scoot Henderson for not being a great three-point shooter at 18, 19 years old, I probably need to do the same with Anthony Black. But what I would say about Anthony Black is there are some things that he can do that Scoot Henderson can't, mainly that he's 6'7" and creates mismatches with his size. But I also agree with you as well. And by the way, I said it with Scoot as well, is like, that is one thing that can be improved. And this isn't a Lonzo Ball jump shot. This isn't an Andre Jackson jump shot from UConn. Both those guys, not just Anthony Black, but Scoot Henderson, it looks good coming off the hands. It's just about, going at a higher percentage. So yes, to answer your question, it is, I think it's probably the quote unquote weakness, if you will, about Anthony Black. It just becomes, like you said, is it teachable? Is it fixable? Is it easy to get to a higher percentage? And I think it is. And we've talked about this a lot over the last couple episodes as we've started these NBA draft profiles, is that, like, no prospect is perfect. Like, you're probably even too young to remember, but the days of getting a third-year player that dominated college basketball for 2 seasons and was an All-American, and like, that doesn't exist anymore. And everybody has flaws. But I'd like to work with Anthony. Like, there's some guys that we'll get to that I think the flaws are way bigger, way less fixable than Anthony Black. But that would be the big one. But to your point and to your question, yes, I agree that it's something that, with hard work, repetition, and by all accounts, he's a hard worker, in theory, should be able to get fixed throughout his career.
So one last thought, and I thought this was pretty impressive on his part. The season starts, and right away, it's clear, like, Eric Musselman trusts him. You said it, that he always puts the ball in his best players' hands, especially towards the end of the game. But I do think as the season went on, we saw a little bit more of, like, his freshman tendencies. And that is no knock, by the way. Like, we all know in college basketball in recent memory, it's very difficult to win and have success in the NCAA tournament when you're relying so much on freshmen. But I do think other teams, especially when Arkansas got to SEC play, especially when they were able to throw a little bit more length on him in the lane, like, that was one thing also that, like, really I think is important to remember. Like, the SEC, they have athletes. I remember being at Madison Square Garden the day before the Sweet 16 and seeing Tennessee practice. Like, it was crazy just how much like those guys popped in person, and seeing like, shoot, these guys, they must be really hard to finish over in the lane and at the rim. And that's another thing about Black that I really like about his game. He is an excellent finisher
I agree.
at the rim. Like, all those reverse layups, like he could do that. But I do think we should note, like, that is another small concern I have, is as SEC play went on last year, other teams, I think, kind of got a little bit of the book on him, and he did struggle a little bit towards the back end of the season, at least compared to what he was doing early on in the season. Is that something you're concerned about at all?
I wouldn't say concerned. I think a couple things, and this is any school, any team, any player, pro prospect, non-pro prospect, whatever, is you get deeper into the season, teams know your scout, teams know you, your personnel, what you do, your scouting report, whatever. And again, I'll just use the easiest reference, is that UConn went undefeated in non-league games and won every single game, if I remember correctly, by double digits. Like, they went like 19-0 in non-league games and won all 19 games by double digits. And they finished what, fourth in the Big East regular season, third. I think maybe third. I think it was fourth. Yeah. And so, yeah, lost to Marquette twice. I don't even remember all the losses. It lost to St. John's at home, lost to Seton Hall on the road. And I know that game, Dan Hurley was out with COVID, but I just bring it up because hitting a wall for a freshman is normal. It's happened to everybody. If I can date myself a little bit, many years ago when I worked on my Kentucky book, I remember talking to John Calipari about John Wall hitting a wall as a freshman, and I think he was the national player of the year that year. If he wasn't, he ended up being the number 1 overall pick. So all freshmen hit a wall, just like all rookies are going to inevitably hit a wall in the NBA. I can't sit here and say it concerns me that much. And I think the other thing too, the point that you bring up, is there's just a lot of great coaching and great athletes in the SEC. Not here to say it's the best. The Big 12 probably statistically was better. The Big East was in that conversation. But I think the caliber of player and the type of player that you face is as good as anybody in college basketball. And so I think you take the fact that you're talking about really well-coached teams. I mean, Rick Barnes, John Calipari, Bruce Pearl, you go on and on down the list. They all know you as well as you know yourself. The athletes that you're playing against, the fact that most of those players 3-4 years older. I mean, you mentioned the Tennessee guys, Euros down low, Oscar Tshiebwe at Kentucky. The guys that you're finishing in the paint against are probably 3-4 years older than you. I can't sit here and say it concerns me all that much. Now, obviously, like any other player, I think strength is an issue. Not an issue, but something that needs to be improved. But that's for literally every 19-year-old that's entering the NBA this year or any year. So I'm not going to sit here and lie. Like, it doesn't really bother me that much. Again, it's not to say he's a perfect prospect, because he's got stuff to work on like everybody, but I can't sit here and say it worries me too much.
All right, that is the full breakdown and scouting report on Arkansas freshman Anthony Black. He's expected to be a top 5, top 10 pick in this NBA draft after a great freshman season at Arkansas. AT, before we get out of here, any other last thoughts?
No, I like I said, as I went through and watched everything and saw, by the way, some of his best games were in some of the biggest moments. Probably played better than any Arkansas player against UConn in the Sweet 16. Maybe his best game was a win, helping Arkansas win at Rupp Arena. Was great against Creighton in that Maui Invitational. I really do, and I don't have a great feel, and we're recording this right before the Memorial Day weekend. People will listen afterward, but I just bring it up because I don't have a great feel for where he ends up, and he is a guy, the first 3 guys that we've talked about, there's kind of a clear, this guy's going to either end up here or here. Wembanyama is obviously going to San Antonio. This Anthony Black feels like his range is wider. So I think he is a guy that is going to, he's going to need to find the right landing spot. But if he does, I think he has a chance to be really good.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. I remember watching that Kentucky game and thinking, like, man, this is a kid that always saves his best games for the biggest moments. And when Arkansas went into Rupp Arena and won, that was an epic, epic moment for Hog fans. But AT, thank you so much for joining me. I had a great time, and looking forward to doing this again soon.
All right, we'll get to the next one soon. Appreciate you having me, Zach.
Absolutely.